Going on now to the last section of Chapter 1, Section 8, we're going to deal with properties of real numbers. And you might recall these words, commutative and associative properties, distributive property, and the identity and inverse property. Using the commutative and associative properties. Well, again, take some notes and then try to memorize this as much as you can. It's just not too long. But if we have, for instance, A plus B, and we know from common sense that this equals B plus A. But you may not have remembered that what is applied here is this commutative property in which the letters in addition are just switched around. So here A is first, then B, here B is first, and then A. Now this would be the commutative property of addition, as we see here. And we could also apply it to multiplication. So we are now allowed to do this at any time because it's an accepted, proven policy in math. So they will ask you in your examples, practice to use the commutative property to complete each. So here it's going to be 5 plus x. You're just reversing the order. This will be x times 3. And here it's going to be 8 times x, so just plain 8x, and 17 plus x. And they're telling us that as we group numbers, and they're getting us ready for the associative property, and basically it's this, and it applies to addition. A plus B plus C equals A plus B plus C. Well, as you look at that, you might say, well, that's true because they're identities. But here we're saying, here they want you to add the A and B first because of the parentheses, and then add the C. Now in this one, they want you to add the B and C first. Oh, I did something. There we go. B and C first, and then add the A. And the results are going to be the same. So this property, when we group things differently, the order is the same, but we're grouping differently. That's the associative property. And this one is of addition. And this one is of multiplication. So what will the example be here? Well, again, the order is going to be the same. 5 plus 4 plus 6. But here we're adding the 4 and 6. Now we're going to add the 5 and the 4. And here, again, the order is the same. -1 times 2 times 5. But now we're going to group these two together. Okay? And they're saying the results are exactly the same. Remember, commutative relates to the order. You're reversing things. Associative, you're just grouping things differently. Now, we do a lot of this I could remember when I taught high school algebra, we used to have to write the rules that allows us to do this. Here they only want you to do it. So what I would do is I'd flip around the 12, then I'd group the 20 and the 12 together, get 22 plus x. And here I would multiply the negative 3 times 7, and that would give me a negative 21x. And here I can just remove the parentheses, get the 9 and the 5 together, 14 plus x, and this is going to be a negative 30x. Now remember, here they're asking us to simplify. In your math lab, they may at times be asking you only to illustrate the rule, the property, without simplifying. Now another famous one that we'll be doing is the distributive property, where we take something like this, and in fact it's usually written in letters, which they will do very shortly. And we take the A and multiply it by the B, and we take the A and multiply it by the C. So we get AB plus AC. That is the distributive property. Now, a little later on, we'll be doing the opposite of the distributive property, where here you see there's a common A factor in each one of these, and we're going to factor out that A, and we're going to get back to this. We're going to use that in chapter 2. That's called factoring. Factoring out the letter A, a common factor, and then you end up with something like this. So keep that in mind. And here we see it. Okay. Now sometimes there'll be 3 terms. We distribute that 3 among each. And can you see now there's a common 3 factor in each one of these that you could factor out of 3 and go back to this. And subtraction is the same. So let's just jump to the answers. They're all written out here for us. We're going to distribute the 2, and we get this. Now this step here, we usually do that mentally. We go from this step to this step. And remember, you could factor out the 2 and go back to this step. Now here it's critical, watch the signs. Negative times a negative will make this a positive. Negative times a positive will make this a negative. Okay? And for each of these, watching the signs carefully. Now, notice what multiplying by a negative 1 does here. This sort of stays the same, but with opposite signs. So a good way to change the signs of something is to multiply it by a negative 1. That changes the signs. Another technique we're going to use. Now, if there's a negative in front of a parenthesis, we can put like a negative 1 there, and then again, it just changes all the signs. So a shortcut here is just when there's a negative and then a parenthesis, remove the parenthesis and just change the signs. Negative 3, negative x, positive w. And here we can cancel a little bit. 2 goes into 6 3 times. So 3x, 2 goes into 14 7 times. And then we have a 7 and a 10 that we will combine later to make 17. Again, this is the distributive principle. So practice, again, we've done something like that. Okay, here they are asking us to write it as a product. That is, they wanted us to factor out the common 8. There's an 8 times this and an 8 times that. We factor out the 8. So the opposite of the distributive property, again, we call that factoring. We're going to use this technique in Chapter 2, which we'll be starting shortly. Okay, so let's do the practice. Here there's a common 5, so we're going to go 5. That we factor out, and we're left with W plus 3. And here we factor out a 9, and we get W plus C. Okay, another property we often come across is called the identity problem. Property, I should say. Yeah, it might be a problem for some people. But anyway, if you have a number and you add 0 to it, it will always just be whatever that number is. So this is called the identity property of addition. We can add a 0 to anything without changing its value. Now if we have an A and we times it by 1, and we've had this before, we talked about fractions, multiplying anything by 1 just leaves it as being A. This is called the identity property of multiplication. Okay? And it's 0 is the only number you can add to something and not change its value. And we spoke of the additive inverse or opposites in section 5. Again, they're preparing us for chapter 2, little by little here. And we've done reciprocals. Remember, the product of a number and its reciprocal is always a positive 1. Now, let's look at this one here. It says, what's the opposite of this? Well, the opposite of this is it's a positive 3/10. It's going to make it 0. The reciprocal of this is a negative 10/3, so that when we multiply these, the product is going to be 1. And we speak a little bit about the additive or multiplicative inverse. If the numbers A and negative A are additive inverse or opposites of each other because their sum is 0, we just went over that. And then this is the reciprocal. Okay. Name the property here. And again, you're going to have to take some notes on this so that you can remember and practice so that when you get it on a test, you're familiar with it. So here we're just changing the order. Commutative of multiplication. Here the order is exactly the same, but we're grouping them differently. This is the associative property. Here we're adding 0 to a number or a letter here. That's the identity of addition. Here we are factoring out a common factor. And what are we doing here? No, we're not factoring. Sorry about that. Look at it a little more carefully. Too many dots here. I'm seeing dots in front of my eyes. So we have 0.2, Z, 0.5, 0.2, so we're switching this order around. So that's the commutative of multiplication, all right. Here we're multiplying something that makes it a product 1. That's the reciprocal or the multiplicative inverse property. Here we're adding opposites, the additive inverse, additive inverse. And here we have, this is like a compound one here because we switched the order of the two, and that would be commutative first, and then we regrouped it. That would be associative. So two things going on. Yes, okay. All right. And that wraps it up. Okay, you're going to be preparing for your test. Remember, I have posted on my video series a review of a test for Chapter 1. Plus, you have your homework logs. You're looking things over carefully. Be sure you get your mastery up there and are ready for our test. And good luck.